The gavel slammed down, sharp and decisive, but it couldn't drown out the tension crackling through the courtroom like a live wire. Every eye in the room was locked on Pam Bondi, the seasoned attorney who had just been fined, not for misconduct, not for disrespecting the court, but for wearing a cross. A cross. Not a statement, not a protest, just a simple, personal symbol of faith resting on a delicate chain around her neck. Yet in this moment, it had become a battleground. From the elevated bench, Judge Nathan Holloway sat, his expression stone-cold, his ruling clear. Remove it, or pay the price. But Holloway had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed Pam would comply. Instead, she did something no one in that courtroom expected. She lifted her chin, locked eyes with the judge, and stood her ground. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm, controlled, dangerous in its steadiness. "The First Amendment doesn't take a recess just because we step into your courtroom." The room went still. A ripple of unease spread through the gallery. Reporters exchanged glances. Attorneys shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Court clerks stole quick looks at the judge, waiting for his response. Even the court stenographer hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't just a legal dispute anymore. This was a fight over power, over rights, over who truly had control in that room. And for the first time, Holloway didn't have an answer. What happens when a judge tries to rewrite the rules in his own courtroom? What do you do when the system turns against you? And how far would you go to fight back? Welcome to the battle that shook the Florida legal system to its core. This is more than just one case. It's about power, corruption, and one woman who refused to back down. If you believe in standing up for your rights, in fighting back when the system tries to silence you, then this is a story you can't afford to miss. Subscribe to Black Footprints now and be part of the movement. Because sometimes, one person's fight becomes a battle for us all. The heavy oak doors of the Tampa courthouse groaned as they swung open, ushering in the morning's first wave of attorneys, clerks, and reporters. Sunlight streamed through the grand windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor, illuminating the quiet hum of legal proceedings about to unfold. Among the steady flow of familiar faces, one figure stood out, Pam Bondi. She strode through the courtroom with an air of unwavering confidence, the sharp clicks of her heels punctuating each deliberate step. Dressed in a crisp navy blazer, her hair swept back in an elegant yet no-nonsense style, she carried herself with the certainty of someone who had fought and won too many battles to be unsettled by what awaited her. This was supposed to be a routine hearing, just another case in a long career defined by sharp arguments and ironclad defenses. And yet, something about the air in the room felt thick, charged with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. From his elevated bench, Judge Nathan Holloway was already watching her. His reputation preceded him, a man known for his iron grip over his courtroom, a judge who thrived on authority, discipline, and absolute control. He was the kind of man who expected deference, not defiance, and the moment their eyes met, Pam knew today would be anything but routine. She moved to the defense table, setting her briefcase down, but she could feel his gaze shift, not to her face, but lower, to the delicate gold cross resting just below her collarbone. A small, unassuming piece of jewelry, yet in that moment, it may as well have been a challenge. Holloway cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the hush like a gavel striking wood. "Ms. Bondi, before we proceed, I must remind you that this courtroom is a place of neutrality. Religious symbols have no place here. You will need to remove that cross." The atmosphere shifted in an instant. A few murmurs rippled through the gallery, attorneys shifting in their seats, reporters glancing at one another, sensing the crackle of something bigger unfolding before them. But Pam barely blinked. She straightened her posture, tilting her chin just slightly, steel in her stance. "Your Honor, with all due respect, my cross is no different than a wedding ring or a locket with a family photo inside. It is personal, it is mine, and it does not interfere with these proceedings." Holloway's expression remained impassive, but his lips pressed into a thin, unimpressed line. "That is not how I see it," he said, his voice smooth, calculated. You have a choice, Ms. Bondi. Remove it, or you will face a fine. A fine, not for contempt, not for misconduct, but for wearing a cross. Pam inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle over her shoulders. This wasn't about jewelry. This was about something far bigger. It was about power, who had the right to dictate what a person could wear, what they could believe, how much of themselves they were allowed to bring into a government institution. And she was not about to let Holloway be the one to decide. She did not move. "If I may, Your Honor," she said evenly, folding her hands over her briefcase, her voice steady calm. "I would like this matter entered into the record." Holloway's mouth twitched, not quite a smirk, but something close, as if he were amused by the idea that she would even attempt to fight him on this. He checked the clock on the wall, his movements slow, deliberate, as if this were nothing more than an inconvenience, a minor delay in his otherwise efficient courtroom. "Ms. Bondi, this is a legal hearing, not a personal debate." Pam did not waver. "And yet, Your Honor, the First Amendment doesn't take a recess for personal opinions." The shift in the room was instant. A few quiet gasps broke out among the spectators, and for the first time, Holloway hesitated. Pam could feel it, the energy, the unspoken realization settling over the room. This wasn't just a hearing anymore. This was a battle, and every single person in that room was watching it unfold. Holloway exhaled sharply, breaking the silence. "Very well," he said, his voice clipped. "Mark the fine in the record." Pam remained steady, her expression unreadable. She had just been fined in open court, not for failing in her duties as an attorney, not for breaking the law, but for wearing a cross. But she wasn't angry. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about a fine. This was about a fight. And if Judge Nathan Holloway thought for a second that she was going to back down, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The courtroom had plunged into a taut, suffocating silence, the kind that hangs in the air before a storm breaks. Pam Bondi remained still, her fingers lightly pressed against the smooth leather of her briefcase, her breath steady, her expression unreadable. She had been fined, not for misconduct, not for a lapse in judgment, but for a piece of jewelry. A cross, a symbol with no bearing on the case, no disruption to the proceedings. Yet here it was, standing at the center of a battle she hadn't planned on fighting today. But if Judge Nathan Holloway thought this was where she would back down, he had severely misjudged her. Lifting her gaze, Pam met Holloway's stare with a calm, calculated steadiness. She could feel the weight of the room pressing in, the quiet anticipation from the gallery, the attorneys shifting in their seats, the court reporter with her fingers hovering just above the keyboard, waiting. Holloway had expected compliance, expected her to lower her head, murmur an apology, and remove the cross without protest. He had miscalculated. "Your Honor, I respectfully request that this matter be entered into the official record." A flicker of irritation crossed Holloway's face, barely perceptible, but Pam caught it. "Ms. Bondi, this is not up for debate." "Then it shouldn't be a problem to document it, should it?" Her voice was steady, sharp as steel, slicing through the courtroom's heavy air. Holloway's jaw tensed, his lips thinning into an unimpressed line. The court reporter's hands finally moved, the rhythmic clacking of keys filling the silence. Pam adjusted her posture, lifting her chin slightly. "Since this court is now engaging in a discussion on personal expression and constitutional rights, I'd like to reference two key Supreme Court rulings." She reached into her briefcase, her movements deliberate, controlled, and retrieved a neatly printed document, placing it on the table before her. Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969. She tapped the page lightly, her voice unwavering. The ruling in that case made one thing clear. The Constitution does not dissolve when a person walks into a government institution. Students who wore black armbands to protest the Vietnam War were protected under the First Amendment. Their expression was neither disruptive nor unlawful. She let her words settle, watching for a reaction. Holloway's fingers curled around the edge of his bench, his knuckles whitening against the polished wood. Pam continued, her voice smooth, unwavering. Then there's West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett, 1943. The Supreme Court ruled that the government cannot compel individuals to act against their personal beliefs, specifically striking down a law that forced students to salute the flag. The ruling reinforced a fundamental truth. Individual rights do not disappear in a courtroom, a school, or anywhere else under the jurisdiction of a U.S. Constitution. Silence. Holloway exhaled slowly, his patience thinning by the second. This is a courtroom, not a classroom, Ms. Bondi. Pam allowed the smallest trace of a smile to cross her lips. Not arrogance, not defiance, just control. And yet, Your Honor, this is precisely where constitutional law should matter most. The energy in the room shifted. This was no longer just a dispute over a fine. Holloway wasn't simply facing an attorney who disagreed with him. He was facing an ironclad legal argument that he had no way to refute. The judge shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. This is about maintaining neutrality in my courtroom. Pam lifted an eyebrow. Neutrality? She let the word hang, then tilted her head slightly. That's an interesting argument, considering that I see attorneys in this very room wearing political lapel pins, fraternity rings, wedding bands, ribbons for breast cancer awareness. None of those seem to disrupt the neutrality of your court. And yet my cross does. A murmur rippled through the gallery, the weight of her words sinking in. Holloway's mouth pressed into a hard, unreadable line, but Pam could feel it, the shift in power. She leaned in ever so slightly, delivering the final blow. Your Honor, I ask you again, what legal precedent supports your fine against me? Not your personal opinion. Not what you believe should or shouldn't be allowed. Legal precedent. Holloway's fingers tapped once, twice against the bench, the rhythm sharp and deliberate. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of a decision he couldn't justify. And then, finally, he exhaled, sharply, reluctantly. The fine is rescinded. Pam didn't move, didn't react immediately. She let his words settle, let them echo in the courtroom, let every person present absorb what had just happened. Then, slowly, she reached for her document, folded it neatly, and slid it back in her briefcase. She had won this round. But as Holloway leaned back, his eyes dark and stormy, Pam knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The courtroom doors had barely swung shut behind Pam Bondi when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She wasn't surprised. News traveled fast in legal circles, and she had just gone head-to-head with Judge Nathan Holloway in a very public, very contentious standoff. What did surprise her, though, was the name flashing across the screen, David Collins. She hesitated for only a second before answering. Collins wasn't the type to call without a damn good reason. As a longtime clerk at the Tampa courthouse, he had been around long enough to know where the skeletons were buried and who was holding the shovel. She pressed the phone to her ear. Collins, it's late. This about today? A brief pause on the other end. Then, a voice low and cautious. We need to talk. But not here. Pam's spine straightened. There was something in his tone, something familiar, something she had heard before from whistleblowers, from insiders who had seen too much but couldn't speak unless they trusted you. This wasn't just about a judge on a power trip. She exhaled, scanning the near-empty hallway outside the courtroom. Where? Corner cafe on 4th, 20 minutes. And Pam? He hesitated. Come alone. The line went dead. She stared at her phone for a beat before slipping it back in her pocket. Whatever this was, it wasn't good. The cafe was nearly deserted when she walked in, the scent of stale coffee clinging to the air. Collins was already there, hunched over a cup of black coffee, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usually neat tie was loosened, and the fine lines on his face seemed deeper under the dim lighting. She slid into the seat across from him, her voice cool but firm. Talk. Collins glanced around once, then leaned in. Holloway isn't just some egotistical judge throwing his weight around, Pam. He's playing a much bigger game. Pam crossed her arms, waiting. Collins lowered his voice. He's angling for a seat on the Florida Supreme Court. He's got backing from the governor's office, big players. But he needs a defining stance, something that sets him apart. Something bold. A slow realization settled in Pam's stomach, like restricting personal freedoms in the courtroom. Collins nodded. Exactly. If he can push this idea that judges have the right to impose neutrality by banning personal symbols, he sets a precedent. And once that door is open, there's no closing it. Pam clenched her jaw. So I was his test case. Collins let out a humorless laugh. You were perfect. A high-profile attorney, known for fighting back, known for your stance on civil liberties. If he could make an example out of you, force you to back down, then the message would be clear. No one is untouchable. Pam's fingers curled around the edge of the table. And the others? Collins hesitated, then sighed. You're not the first, Pam. Just the first to fight back. That made her stomach turn. Ooh, a handful of defense attorneys. A public defender, a young guy, Sam Whitaker, wore a pin in support of a veterans charity. Holloway made him remove it. The kid didn't argue. Collins shook his head. And there were others. A lawyer wearing a Star of David necklace. A Muslim attorney with a small crescent pin. They all complied. No one wanted to risk their careers over it. Pam inhaled slowly, rage simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't about her. This was about control. About a man who wanted to reshape the judiciary into a place where personal belief had no place, unless it fit his own narrative. She sat back, drumming her fingers against the table. So what's my next move? Collins studied her for a moment, then smirked. That depends. You want to play defense or offense? Pam smiled. Offense. Always. And just like that, the fight had just gotten bigger. Pam Bondi didn't waste time. Battles weren't won in silence. And this was no longer just about her. This was about power, precedent, and a man who thought he could bend the law to serve his own ambitions. If Holloway believed he could quietly set the rules of the game, then he had no idea who he was dealing with. She picked up her phone and made the call. Lisa Reynolds answered on the second ring. Pam, I was wondering when I'd hear from you. Pam smirked. Lisa Reynolds wasn't just any journalist. She was a veteran investigative bulldog, the kind who made corrupt officials lose sleep. She had taken down judges, prosecutors, politicians, anyone who thought their power made them untouchable. And now, Pam was about to hand her the biggest story of the year. Lisa, how fast can you get to my office? A pause, then a chuckle. This good, huh? Vigor. Holloway isn't just flexing his power. He's running a test case. If he gets away with this, he sets a precedent that lets judges strip personal freedoms from attorneys in their own courtrooms. And that's just the beginning. Lisa didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 20. Pam hung up. Let the games begin. By noon the next day, the headline was everywhere. Florida judge finds attorney for wearing a cross. Legal battle over religious expression explodes. News anchors tore into the case in rapid-fire debates. Conservative networks called it an attack on religious freedom. Liberal commentators warned of judicial overreach and abuse of power. Legal analysts weighed in, some defending Holloway's so-called stance on neutrality, others ripping it apart as unconstitutional nonsense. Then, social media erupted. Pam's name was trending on Twitter. Hashtag Bondi versus Holloway spread like wildfire. Some hailed her as a defender of civil liberties. Others branded her as a troublemaker challenging courtroom decorum. But regardless of what side people took, they were talking, and that was exactly what Pam needed. That night, Lisa Reynolds took the fight to primetime television. Her no-nonsense style cut through the chaos, delivering the story in sharp, undeniable terms. This isn't just about one attorney and one judge. This is about whether a sitting judge can dictate personal expression in a courtroom, even when it has no impact on the proceedings. The Constitution doesn't take a back seat just because a judge decides it should. Pam sat in her office, arms crossed, watching as the debate ignited like gasoline on an open flame. But she knew Holloway wasn't going to take this quietly. Later that evening, her phone buzzed with a message from one of her colleagues. You've seen the statement, right? Pam narrowed her eyes as she clicked the link. A press release, official, cold, calculated. Attorney Pamela Bondi engaged in behavior unbecoming of an officer of the court, disrupting legal proceedings and undermining judicial authority. Judges have the right to maintain order in their courtrooms, and actions that challenge that order will not be tolerated. Pam exhaled slowly. So this was his move. Holloway wasn't going to argue the constitutionality of his ruling. He couldn't. Instead, he was trying to reframe the entire narrative. This wasn't about freedom of expression anymore. Now it was about her. He was shifting the battlefield, painting her as a rogue attorney, stirring up controversy for attention, making it seem like she was the one threatening the integrity of the courts. She leaned back in her chair, feeling the embers of something hotter than anger settle deep in her gut. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was war. Cracking her knuckles, she rolled her shoulders back, the fire already burning in her veins. "All right, Judge. You want to fight?" She smirked. "Let's give them a show." Pam had expected Holloway to retaliate, but even she was surprised by how quickly the system moved when it wanted to crush someone who refused to fall in line. The next morning, as she stepped in her office, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, she could already feel the storm brewing. Her inbox was overflowing, reporters demanding sound bites, attorneys reaching out, some with quiet words of support, others with thinly veiled warnings. Some told her to back off before things got worse. But Pam had never been one to take warnings as anything other than challenges. And then came the message that made her stomach turn cold. Her assistant, Lauren Hastings, appeared in the doorway, face tight, holding up her tablet. "You're going to want to see this." Pam set her coffee down and took the tablet, eyes scanning the headline before she even registered the weight of what she was about to read. Florida Bar opens ethics investigation into Pamela Bondi after courtroom incident. She barely blinked, but something inside her coiled tight, sharp as barbed wire. She scrolled further, reading the official statement. The Florida Bar Association has initiated a formal review of attorney Pamela Bondi's conduct following her recent actions in a Tampa courtroom. Judges have the right to maintain decorum, and attorneys are expected to conduct themselves with professionalism and respect. The bar will evaluate whether Ms. Bondi's actions were in violation of professional standards. Pam let out a slow breath, her grip tightening around the tablet just a little too hard. Lauren crossed her arms. "This is Holloway, right? This has his fingerprints all over it." Pam exhaled through her nose. Of course, it was Holloway. He had lost the legal argument, lost control of the media narrative, and now he was trying to use the system itself to bury her. This wasn't about professionalism. This was about punishment. She had seen this move before, the classic bureaucratic takedown. When a powerful man couldn't win in the public eye, he'd turn to backroom politics, to committees and panels, to quiet procedural assassinations. An ethics investigation, even a baseless one, was a nuclear option in the legal world. If the Florida Bar found even the slimmest pretext to move forward, she could be suspended, disbarred, stripped of everything she had built. And that was the real goal, wasn't it? Holloway wasn't just trying to silence her. He wanted to make her a warning to every attorney who might consider challenging the absolute power of the bench, to every young lawyer who still believed in fighting back against the system. Step out of line, and you'll lose everything. Lauren hesitated. How bad is this? Pam set the tablet down, steepling her fingers. It's bad, but not impossible. Lauren raised an eyebrow. We talking paper cut or gunshot wound? Pam exhaled, leaning back in her chair, voice cool, steady. Gunshot. But he missed a vital organ. Lauren let out a dry laugh, but the tension between them was thick, settling over the office like a storm cloud before the lightning strike. So what do we do? Pam's gaze darkened. Holloway thought he could use the system against her? Fine. She was about to use the entire damn system against him. Her voice was quiet, but the steel in it was unmistakable. We fight, and this time, we don't just defend. We go for the kill. Pam knew that Holloway had overplayed his hand. He thought he could use the system to crush her, to force her into submission. But what he hadn't counted on was how far she was willing to go to expose him. And she wasn't alone. Lisa Reynolds had built a career on tearing down powerful men who thought they were untouchable, and she had a nose for corruption sharper than most detectives. David Collins, after years of working quietly in the background, had finally had enough. Together, they started digging. It was Lisa who found it first. A single email buried deep in the system, hidden behind layers of legal jargon and vague formalities. But to someone who knew what to look for, it was a smoking gun. She called Pam the moment she saw it. "You need to get to my office." Now, Pam didn't ask questions. She grabbed her keys and was out the door in minutes. When she stepped into Lisa's office, the journalist's face was unreadable, but her eyes were gleaming. Lisa turned her laptop toward Pam. She leaned in, scanning the screen. And then, her heart stopped. There it was. A direct email from Holloway's office to a political action committee with deep ties to Florida's judicial appointments. And it wasn't even subtle. This case provided a unique opportunity to set a precedent regarding judicial authority over personal expression. A strong stance on this issue will send a clear message and reinforce the role of the bench in shaping courtroom standards. Pam's blood ran cold. This wasn't about neutrality. This wasn't about decorum. This was about control. Holloway had been using this case as a political stepping stone. He wanted a seat on the Florida Supreme Court, and he was willing to strip attorneys of their constitutional rights to get it. Pam exhaled, sitting back in her chair. "It's over." Lisa smirked. "Oh, sweetheart, it's just beginning." Pam didn't wait. She wanted the world to see this for what it was. She forwarded the email to every major news outlet, attaching a simple but scathing statement. "Judges are meant to uphold the law, not manipulate it for personal gain. This is not just about me. This is about every attorney, every defendant, every person who believes in due process. If Holloway succeeds, what's next? What other freedoms will be dictated by his ambition?" Within hours, the media storm erupted like never before. Leaked email exposes Florida judge's political agenda behind controversial courtroom decision. Pam Bondi versus the system, a corrupt judge's plan to restrict personal freedom. Judicial overreach? Holloway caught using case for political gain. Television pundits dissected the ethical collapse of the judiciary, and legal analysts tore Holloway apart. The narrative had flipped. The judge who had tried to punish Pam for a cross was now being scrutinized for abusing his power. Pam stood in her office, arms crossed, watching the press do exactly what it was meant to do: hold power accountable. Lauren peeked into the room, smirking. "So, how's Holloway's day going?" Pam didn't even look away from the screen. "About as well as the Titanic's." Pam had fought some tough battles in her career, but this was a war. And now, for the first time since it all began, she had the upper hand. The leaked email had landed like a bomb in the Florida legal world, shattering Holloway's carefully crafted image of an impartial, principled judge overnight. The headlines weren't just damning. They were relentless. By the next morning, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Legal analysts, political commentators, even former judges were calling it what it was: corruption in the judiciary at its finest. And then, the real consequences started rolling in. Pam sat at her desk, her phone buzzing nonstop, as Lauren burst through the door, holding up her tablet like a trophy. "You're gonna love this." Pam took the tablet, scanning the breaking news. Florida Judicial Review Board announces official investigation into Judge Nathan Holloway. She let out a slow breath, the weight of victory settling over her. She had forced their hand. The Judicial Review Board, normally slow-moving and bureaucratic, had been left with no choice. With the email exposed, with public outrage swelling, they couldn't afford to look the other way. Holloway was no longer a judge making a controversial ruling. He was a liability. Her phone rang. She didn't even check the number before answering. "Tell me good news." Lisa Reynolds. Her voice was sharp, tinged with satisfaction. "The Florida bar is dropping the complaint against you. They're framing it as lack of substantial evidence, but we both know what really happened." Pam exhaled, closing her eyes for just a moment. They had come after her career. They had tried to silence her. But now, they were running for cover. Lisa continued. "They're hoping this dies down, but Holloway? He's finished, Pam. He's radioactive. The governor's office won't touch him now, not with an ethics investigation breathing down his neck." Pam smirked. So, no Supreme Court seat in his future? Lisa actually laughed. Not unless he plans on mopping the floors of the courthouse instead. Pam didn't just win. She did something bigger. She started a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Legal scholars were debating the role of personal expression in the courtroom. Attorneys were speaking out, emboldened by the fact that someone had finally stood up to judicial overreach. Civil rights groups were already filing motions to challenge outdated dress code policies in courthouses across the country. What had started as one judge's petty attempt at control had become a national debate on personal liberties. Pam sat back in her chair, watching the news coverage as Holloway's name was dragged through the mud. Lauren walked in, coffee in hand, grinning. So what's next? Pam took the cup, sipping slowly, savoring the moment. Next, we make sure no one tries to pull this stunt again. And just like that, she didn't just win her case. She changed the damn system. Pam Bondi had spent her entire career fighting battles inside courtrooms. But this one was different. This wasn't just about a single case or a single ruling. This was about an entire system, corrupt, self-serving, and willing to crush anyone who dared to challenge it. It was about a man who thought he could manipulate the law for his own ambitions, and a woman who refused to let him. And now, Holloway was finished. His aspirations for the Florida Supreme Court were dead in the water. The very people who once backed him, the political donors, the legal allies, even the governor's office, had begun distancing themselves, pretending they had never supported him in the first place. His name had become a stain, a cautionary tale about the dangers of overreaching power and the consequences of being exposed. The ethics investigation was still ongoing, but at this point, it didn't matter. Holloway's reputation was in ruins. Even if he somehow kept his robe, his authority was shattered beyond repair. Every attorney who stepped into his courtroom from now on would know exactly who he was. The judge who tried to silence a lawyer and lost. Spectacularly. But Pam hadn't just defended herself. She had sent a message to every attorney, every judge, every legal professional in the country. And people were paying attention. In the weeks that followed, Pam found herself at the center of a national conversation. She was invited to legal panels, televised debates, law school discussions. Some called her a champion of civil liberties. Others saw her as a troublemaker who had exposed cracks in the judicial system that too many preferred to ignore. Either way, she had forced a conversation that couldn't be undone. At one of her speaking engagements, a young law student raised her hand. She was nervous, wide-eyed, clutching a notepad as if it held the answers to her entire future. "Ms. Bondi, how did you know you would win?" Pam smiled. "I didn't." She leaned forward slightly, making sure every aspiring attorney in the room heard her loud and clear. "But that's not the point, is it? The point is that when someone tries to take your rights away, when they try to silence you, you don't sit down and let it happen. You fight." She paused, letting her words sink in. Because the second you stop fighting, that's when they've already won. The room was silent for a beat. Then, thunderous applause. Pam glanced at the cameras in the back of the room, knowing that her words would reach more than just the people sitting in front of her. Somewhere out there, in a courtroom, in a law school, in a judge's chamber, someone was listening. Someone was thinking twice about backing down. And that was the real victory. Days later, during a nationally televised interview, Pam sat across from a well-known journalist who had been covering her case since the beginning. "Pam, if you could leave people with just one message after all of this, what would it be?" She didn't even hesitate. Pam turned to the camera, her gaze steady, her voice unwavering. "When your freedom is threatened, don't wait for someone else to fight for it. Stand up. Speak out. Because sometimes it only takes one person to change everything." And she meant every word.